What's up, everybody? It's Sam Dunn in the brand new digs here at BangerTV. What do you think? It's a bit of a throwback to the 2010s. But before I get on to the main task at hand, let me give you some updates of what I've been up to in recent weeks and months. First of all, our brand new documentary, The Ballad of Judas Priest, had its world premiere at the Berlinale Festival in Berlin. It was amazing. I was there with my co-director, Tom Morello, and lead singer of Judas Priest, Rob Halford, and 1,600 people in their seats. And the response from audiences and press so far has been amazing. Dovetailing towards today's activity, Lamb of God coming to Toronto in 1 week on March 20th. And why does that matter? I get 1 year older on March 20th. So looking forward to going to the show with some family, with some friends, with some crew, and gonna do a little interview with Mark Morton on show day. So look for that coming very soon. But let's get on with the real deal. I'm here today to review the brand new album released today on Epic Records by Lamb of God called Into Oblivion.
You have known me by a different name. I am the one who's outside the frame. I am the bringer of the truth from which you run into oblivion. The bringer of the truth from which you run into oblivion.
All right, so I'm not really going to do a bio per se. I'll tell you a little bit about my history with the band and my sense of their trajectory over the last 20 plus years. So I first met Randy Blythe and Mark Morton in 2004 when I interviewed them for our first documentary, Metal A Headbanger's Journey. So that essentially started a relationship, a band that I've listened to a lot over the last 20 plus years, and I've kept in touch with over the years, doing various interviews for different shows, seeing them a bajillion times. And yeah, more recently, I hosted Randy Blythe on stage on his latest book tour. So to lay the cards on the table, this is a band I'm very familiar with. It's a band whose music I've enjoyed for many years. So maybe I'm in my own echo chamber here. Maybe the fix is in, but just need to let you know that I'm really here to observe the latest record rather than to judge it, because I think when you're so close to something, you just gotta kind of ramble and give your thoughts. All right, so Into Oblivion is Lamb of God's 10th studio album since their first record released in 2000, I think, called New American Gospel. So a band with a huge volume of work under its belt, and over the course of the last 2+ decades, this is a band that's grown in popularity exponentially. I'll say it, the band has said it. I don't think any of us would have thought that here we are in the mid-2020s and Lamb of God is the size of the band that they've become. So this has been a pretty impressive and aggressive ascendance over the last 20+ years. And this may seem like an odd methodology, but in many ways in preparing for today's review, I actually spent a fair bit of time listening to the back catalog, because I think when you're reviewing a band with so much music, you really gotta kind of get perspective on the journey and where they were, where they went, and where they seem to be going on this latest record. Okay, so let's dive into some of the tracks and my thoughts on this album. I found one of the most interesting things about Lamb of God over the years is the deep tracks on the records. In other words, I've paid a lot of attention to the songs later in the records because they're often, not just with Lamb of God, but with many bands, of kind of where they're going to go. I start with the song Descending off Sacrament, which was kind of an out-of-place song, but was actually one of my favorites and has since become a staple of the live set. You have songs like Reclamation off of Wrath. You've got songs like King Me and Insurrection, and then more recently, a song like September Song. And why I highlight these songs is because why? Well, they're not laid to rest. They're not redneck. They're not ruined. They're not the tracks that tend to get held up as the staple tracks of Lamb of God. But all of those tracks over the years have given an indication of the way the band's sound has quite gradually, and I hate this word, I'll say it anyway, organically has changed over the years. So why do I mention that? Well, my main observation about Into Oblivion is that this album is by far the most sonically diverse Lamb of God record in their entire catalog, in my opinion. What does that mean? Well, what it means is you've got a bunch of songs that are nudging in all sorts of different directions. Make no mistake, it's Lamb of God. If you like Lamb of God, you'll probably like this album. But what I'm getting at is that we're starting to see even more diversity in the sound. One, Randy's vocals is probably the most clear example of that. We've not only got some higher melodic parts in some of the middle tracks on the album, we've also got this kind of like shouty thing that he's started to do. In other words, Randy is really starting to mix up the way he approaches the vocals for this band. What we're also starting to see is a lot of tempo shifts, not only song to song, but within each song. And I think Art Cruz is bringing a significant amount of groove and tempo shifts in a lot of these songs. And so while we still have those ever familiar and fucking ever so pleasing bludgeoning sections of Lamb of God songs, we're seeing a lot more variety in the way that the tempos are working across the album.
Cigarettes and falling snow. Back when things still matter. An optimistic overdose. A heart that wasn't shattered. Go!
Bass player alert, John Campbell. Boys, keep giving John the pedestal. Let's go. A lot of sections of these songs are featuring the bass, most notably in one of the advanced tracks, Sepsis, but other tracks across the album. It's nice to hear because I think what it's doing is it's also hearkening a bit back to the Burn the Priest days and their Richmond days, which they've talked a lot about in the press leading up to this record. It's bringing kind of like a gritty dirginess rather than that just like that straight ahead super metal, like very clean, aggressive sound. By bringing the bass to the fore, it's just expanding the texture of the band's sound and really giving it a lot more layers. And not to mention one of my favorite parts on the whole record, bass and cowbell coming together. Nice work. right, so what does this diversifying of the sound really mean for this record? Well, I think what it's doing is that when the band sort of returns to some of those classic Lamb of God moments, which for me are those breakdowns and those really lethal thrash sections of songs, the diversity is kind of setting those sections up in an even bigger and more dramatic way. So don't be fooled here, folks. Just because we've got cowbell, melodic vocals, and more bass and a lot of shifts in the tempo doesn't mean that there aren't those classic Lamb of God breakdown moments. But what is happening is when those motherfuckers come, they're even bigger than before because of the way they've positioned them within the song. So I love to talk about songwriting, super nerd alert. Really what we're hearing here is a classic case of a band that's been doing their thing for a long time. They're maturing as songwriters. They're starting to get comfortable with the idea of expanding the sound in different ways. And frankly, I think they're doing it in a pretty tasteful way because it doesn't always happen that way. But I feel with Lamb of God, they're finding a way to broaden out the sound without really jeopardizing the core Lamb of God tonality and texture that we've grown to love about them. So any critiques to offer? I don't know. Who am I to say? You know, listen, if you're a Lamb of God fan, you're going to like this record. But if you're a Lamb of God fan that hasn't enjoyed the ways that they've broadened the sound over past records, I didn't mention earlier tracks like Overlord and Embers with Chino Moreno on Sturm und Drang. If you didn't like the band moving in those directions, then this might not be your favorite Lamb of God record. But if you have enjoyed the ways that the band has been expanding their sound over the years, I think this is for you. So listen, where does it sit in the catalog? I mean, I don't know. We've all got our favorites. I love As the Palaces Burn, Ashes of the Wake. Wasn't maybe as big of a fan as Ashes as what the general Lamb of God population seems to be. Sacrament, but most notably, I stood up and said Sturm und Drang from 2015 was one of their strongest records. And in my opinion, this is the strongest Lamb of God record since that record, because I think on Sturm und Drang, they really did start to expand the sound in some pretty ballsy ways, given how orthodox and close-minded the metal community can be sometimes. And so I see Into Oblivion really is picking up on what that album offered 11 years ago. All right, so I said at the top, these were observations, not judgments, but you know, at Banger, we do the skull rating. So I'm gonna do the skull rating. I'm giving it 4.5 skulls out of 5. Well, that's it for me. Thanks for watching. I'll see you, hopefully, at the Ballad of Judas Priest somewhere around the world, and see you at the Lamb of God show.
Retreating into a well-polished lie, you turn away